to lead us in this discussion about ERISA, please help me welcome Karrie Johnson Diaz.
Great. Thank you very much. So originally, David Morse was going to be the one to give this talk, and I was just supposed to be the second byline and not in front of you, unfortunately. He sends his regrets he couldn't be here today, but he did say that any errors or mistakes in the slides, I can completely blame on him. He's very generous that way. So let's see if I can maneuver both the clicker, the laptop, and my notes. So I feel like we should have had a better title. We should have had ERISA is not Ebola. I mean, I think that the symmetry of the two words is, is too great to give up. So we really missed an opportunity on that one. So as we've been talking about, obviously, there is a crisis around retirement savings. I think everybody can agree that people are not saving enough. We've talked about how a large portion of the workers virtually have no savings or investment. Traditional pensions are not widely available, and employees are much more likely to save through their company 401k than their own IRA or set up their own taxable account with their own money. I know there's been some numbers thrown out there, 50 million workers don't have coverage, so I'm going to blame David for this 1/2 figure, although maybe it's private sector workers, and that's where the half comes from. 1/2 of private sector workers? Got it. Got it, which is 1 in 5 is 1 in 5 of workers, no matter where, individuals.
So you have all the private sector workers?
Yes.
Half of them have some kind of plan, half of them have not.
Yes.
Full-time, not just private sector.
Got it.
Full-time.
Full-time workers.
Forget about having anything. We're just trying to fight for the ones that have full-time jobs.
And this is why I'm a lawyer and not anything to do with the math field. So why some employers don't provide retirement plans? Some expense, there's management time involved, and there's fear. I mean, if you're going to offer a plan and under ERISA, you're going to have to deal with about 85 million rules, and you're going to have to learn those rules and make sure that you're managing it effectively, in addition to management affecting your business. So states are acting, and that's why you're here. So the typical trajectory of that action starts with enabling legislation that typically creates a state board to devise and run basically a turnkey program, something that's simple, something that will work. That is, the goal would be something low cost, low risk, and user friendly, because often when you're looking at a broad solution to something, we're dealing with people who probably have never invested money on their own. Maybe they have their own bank account, but beyond that, they haven't invested something. So the types of issues you have to face are, what is the, based on how it's going to be invested, participant reaction if they see money that they've been putting aside and that money goes down. And so that's why low yield, stable value funds are, on the table, and then maybe you would move towards a life cycle fund as people got used to what that would look like. But the goal is to allow meaningful amounts to actually be saved for retirement and to secure that money so that that money is not available to take a loan out to buy a boat, but is actually going to be used for retirement. But at the same time, it's important to leave room for private sector to craft their own solutions, right? Because it's to get to the same goal, it's just you need flexibility within that scheme. But as you know, there are challenges for the states. Oh, that's funny. Oh, there he is. I was like, there's a guy on my side. So familiar with managing traditional defined benefit plans, pensions, 401ks, 457 plans, those are all familiar within the public sector. But there's already, you're aware of fiduciary responsibilities, pooled and professionally managed funds, and risk management. There are state fiduciary laws that are out there that are similar to ERISA. They just haven't done it for all these little plans in this sort of sense. And then, of course, state plans are exempt from ERISA. And for anyone, no matter what we're talking about, what you don't know is scary. So what we think you might be surprised to learn is that the ERISA rules really are very similar to a lot of the state rules that are already in place in terms of prudent man, diversification, exclusive benefit. I mean, these are all similar concepts that are built into a number of state fiduciary laws. State retirement plans frequently employ these ERISA-like fiduciary concepts because the goal is the same, right? It's to protect the work, protect the funds, and to have it provided in a manner that actually provides retirement. So how would ERISA and other laws apply to state actions to address the needs in the private sector? That's really the question. So here's your ERISA basics for those of you that haven't studied it as long as some others in the room. So it covers all 401ks, traditional pensions, and other employer plans that defer payments until retirement. It regulates plan operation, and it imposes strict duties on fiduciaries because it is important, right? As we talked about, ERISA stands for Retirement Income Security Act. And so prior to ERISA, there was a need for a federal solution. A typical IRA, one that you'd have on your own, is not an ERISA plan. This is an exception built into the statutory scheme. So while ERISA has a lot of rules, it also does provide workable standards and sound protections, and it has a system for resolving benefit claims. So it has a system in which it does work. So the goal here is that you shouldn't be scared of it. So the fiduciary details within ERISA, at a high level, the fiduciaries are the plan sponsor, the administrative board, or the committee that oversees the plan, anyone really who has control over the plan money, anyone with power to hire or fire a fiduciary under the plan. The duties include prudent expert, but you can outsource this to professionals and you can consult with them. They act in the best interests of the participants, but perfection is not required. You just need reasonable decision making. So a lot of the committees that I work with on retirement plans, it's about a system in place. It's about having an RFP process for deciding who's going to be your service provider for the plan. It's about doing fee benchmarking to make sure that what the plan is paying is a reasonable amount. It's not to make sure you get the lowest cost. There's not an answer. There is no, quote, defined perfection when it comes to fiduciaries. It's about having a reasonable process in place where you're being diligent about that process. So ERISA preemption, we've talked about this a little bit already this afternoon. ERISA trumps state law that, quote, relates to a benefit plan. So this is a shifting legal standard. So as a state law that requires employees to offer a no-cost benefit, is it preempted, right? This is the question on the table. Does it preempt these state enabling laws? So we know that there is an IRA exception, and there are plans out there that are designed like an IRA. So at the end of the day, it will be decided by the courts. So states have a choice, right? You can decide whether or not you're going to design something that's designed to be ERISA compliant or ERISA exempt. So there are generally 3 plan options. There's the individual retirement account, the IRA, that would be exempt. A 401k defined contribution plan, a DC plan, that would be covered by ERISA. Traditional pension, aka a defined benefit plan, also covered by ERISA. So ERISA exempt or ERISA coverage. So states have been enacting both models, right? California's approach is the IRA approach, Massachusetts is the ERISA covered. But the point is there's a choice to be made of how you want it to be designed. And obviously the DOL guidance that will come out will be helpful in that regard. I don't know who designed it with what pops up when I do the clicking. It wasn't me. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about these 3 options. So the first, the IRA. So an IRA option in a state enabling statute, what it typically looks like is you have employee contributions via payroll withholding. There's no employer contributions or employer endorsement per se. Employees invest from a menu of available funds selected by the state board. So the positives here is it's simple. It's portable. It's the employee's IRA. They can move it with them where they go. And if designed like an IRA, there would be no ERISA coverage. Cons are there are low contributions. So currently, you can only contribute up to $5,500 a year, which, though, is better than 0, right, starting you somewhere. There could be leakage in terms of how protected it is, what they could take the money out, what they could use it for. And there's a question about whether or not states could require auto-enrollment with opt-out without triggering ERISA. So David would argue, because he told me to say this, it's still voluntary even if you have auto-enrollment. You just need to communicate in advance that if you don't make a choice, this is the default choice. So the argument being, it's not mandatory to have auto-enrollment, it's just a default mechanism. If you communicate it sufficiently in advance, then it should still be considered. There's an argument that that's still voluntary. 401k or defined contribution plans. So these plans also have employee contributions via payroll withholding. You also have employer matching contributions or employer non-matching contributions, like a percentage of compensation are permitted in these arrangements. Employees, again, invest from a menu of available funds selected by the board. And the positives here are that it is flexible. Auto-enrollment is allowed. There's a higher contribution limit, so for this year, it's currently $18,000 a year. It's also portable, and there's less leakage than an IRA because of the way it's protected under ERISA. The cons are it's more complicated than an IRA. ERISA does apply, and then the question is whether or not how it's set up. Is it set up as a single plan, a MEP, or are they many separate plans? So I think we talked about this a little bit, but the idea or the concepts that have been discussed is if you have an affinity relationship, perhaps all employers in California, that might qualify to make it a single plan, which I think is the approach 2 that we talked about earlier that might work. And then it's easier to administer if you're looking at administering one plan as opposed to administering many different plans. And then also the concept of what are the employer's responsibilities when they are involved in a state-run 401k like this. The third type is a pension plan, a defined benefit plan, which I'm sure you are all familiar with as state legislatures. But employees receive a lifetime annuity. Employers and employees may contribute. Typically, it's more common these days that just employers contribute, except for maybe a nominal amount. The board or its delegate invests plan funds. The positives are it's ideal for providing retirement income because the employee is going to get a set amount when they go to retire, and they know what that defined benefit is. There is less leakage. The detractions are employers have the risk of underfunding. In a DC context, obviously the employee bears the risk of the investment return, where in the DB context, the employer does. Now these can be reduced via design. You can do a hybrid design, and that's a way to bolster that. But it's more complex and costly to administer, and ERISA does apply. So maybe talking about ERISA applying as a negative doesn't help the title of this topic, but we'll just go with it. Washington to the rescue. So until recently, the DOL was somewhere between unsure or unfriendly to SIRS. They were especially concerned IRA plans avoiding the worker protections because the idea is to protect the money. ERISA-covered MEPs seemed to be welcome, and then the president spoke. So just less than a month ago, it was announced that by December 32nd, which clearly is after the end of the year, we'll blame David. That's also part of the proposed rulemaking. They're going to add a year to the 12 calendar month. Why not? That's right. The DOL, maybe we can get bipartisan support for it. The DOL will propose a rule clarifying how states can move forward, including on requirements to auto-enroll employees and for employers to offer coverage. Secretary Perez is on board and acknowledged that there, as we heard earlier, acknowledged that there is a lack of clarity, which is making it difficult for states to develop solutions. What will the DOL do? Seems silly to have a slide on this because she's right there, but the president suggests that the regs will say something along the lines of mandatory IRAs with auto-enrollment escalation can meet ERISA exemption and avoid preemption. Will the regs be finalized by the end of the Obama administration? Oh, we don't know. We do know that the proposed regs are been promised by the end of the year. Will regulations add ERISA-like fiduciary protection rules and protections? For example, under ERISA, there's a rule about how quickly contributions need to be invested, so from payroll to the trust. Now, obviously, if you're talking about a state-run plan where you're collecting it from many different small employers, you're going to have a longer process than if you're dealing with one employer with one payroll running it to one plan, right? So it's going to take it a lot longer. So these are the types of, the details are in the plumbing, right? How is it all going to work in practice? Investments. So IRAs and 401ks can have default investments of professionally managed, diversified, low-cost funds. So these are situations where employee has contributions, either their own or the employer's, but they haven't made investment elections. There are rules under ERISA that allow plans to pick a default investment where this money goes. Plans also offer a menu of professionally managed funds that when you do make an affirmative election as an employee, you choose from one of these menu of options. Pension plans invested by a board or a delegate would have no minimum return bogey. Another issue that needs to be considered is federal securities law. You have to make sure that it's okay, essentially. So depending on the investment structure, investments offered to participants must be registered as a security or exempt under the 33 Act, or an investment vehicle also must have to register as an investment company unless they're exempt. Registration can be expensive and bothersome. There are exemptions for qualified retirement plan, but probably not needed for an IRA. Exemptions for state government issuers. You can create a special purpose bank issuer, and funding vehicles within a plan, like mutual funds, are registered or exempt. But it's just one of the things that you need to make sure that is something you've checked off on your list. The message here is that state-sponsored plans can avoid risk and cost to taxpayers. Over time, they can be self-supporting. You have enough money going with enough investments, they can start to self-support themselves, and so the cost also is minimized that way. And they can offer options for fund investment. They dance. So the bottom line is that states can help workers to save for retirement. There is no, quote, correct solution. The IRA, 401k, and pension can each have pros and cons. There's no reason to fear ERISA. ERISA shouldn't be made into the boogeyman to stop states from taking action to address the retirement crisis. I mean, I think the only thing we know for sure is that people aren't saving enough, and at least with respect to auto enrollment, it's been wildly successful in the private sector in terms of getting their employees to contribute towards their own retirement. And I ended early.
Any questions? Okay. Could we get a mic to the gentleman back there?
Being from Texas, a very conservative state, I can sort of imagine that we might someday perhaps tentatively consider a very conservative version of what's been discussed. So the California plan that you talked about, even though it's from California, might be interesting to us, since it sounds like sort of the bare minimum. Does the California plan provide auto enrollment? And are there other plans like that in any other state that provide auto enrollment?
So you can answer that, or Treasurer Chung can answer it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
let's let Chung answer.
Yes, you're good. You want to take the mic? We're recording this, so if you could, yeah.
So the design is to have auto enrollment with an opt-out.